We're in Job. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap just because last week when I turned the camera on to record, there wasn't a card in there to record anything. So if you're watching the second one, you may be a little bit lost on some of this. So just a quick recap. The author of Job is uncertain. Jewish tradition says it's Moses. Others have said it's actually Job, but we really have no good idea. It's the oldest written book in the Bible. And this book really deals with and lets us look behind the scenes, if you will, into heaven and what's going on behind the scenes in Job's life. And Job certainly has no idea that these things are occurring, and certainly his friends don't either. And what we'll see this morning as we get into it is friends who, to me, if you have friends like these guys, you don't need enemies. They're not very encouraging at all, at least in the beginning. And God actually at the end stands up for Job and says, listen to him, he knows what he's talking about. So it's a very instructive book. And one of the major themes through this book is the need we have to trust in God in all circumstances, always. It's easy for us as human beings to get caught up in our circumstances and in our human frailty. We think, oh, I must have sinned, or I must not be doing what God wants because now God's, brought this into my life. Certainly he brings circumstances into our life, but it's not to punish us. That was taken care of at the cross. We don't have to worry about that at all. And so the major theme is we need to trust God, and then also getting a good look at what I call the theology of suffering. We all suffer in various ways, and certainly some among us suffer much, much more than others. But it's important to have the right perspective on that suffering and what we're going through at that time. And so what we have is Job here. He's a great man, the greatest man in the East at that time. He was married, he had 10 kids, he had just a ton of livestock. And Satan goes before the throne of God. To me, that's just an astounding thing, that God would allow Satan to even come into his presence. And God, knowing Job's heart and knowing what Satan was after, actually tells Job, or tells Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan says, well, he'll praise your name just because of the way you blessed him. But if you let me take away some of that stuff, he'll curse you to your face. And God knew better than that. And so he said, well, you can do whatever you want to do, just don't touch a hair on his body. And so all the livestock, and one day all the livestock are gone. All 10 of his kids are killed. Servants were captured and servants were killed. All of a sudden this man goes from being, if you will, the president of that particular area in the world, to all of a sudden he's a homeless beggar in the gutter, living in the streets. Quite a shocking turn of events in just 24 hours. And so Job still doesn't curse God. Satan goes back to God and says, I bet if you let me touch him, he'll curse you. And God says, no, he won't. He says, you can touch him, don't kill him. And so this horrible affliction comes upon Job. It's often described in the Bible as boils, but I think it's so much more than that, because it penetrated to his very inner physical being. Here's a man, he smelt horrible. He was covered with sores of some kind that were so uncomfortable and so itching that he actually took pieces of broken pottery and was scraping himself. You got to be in some pretty bad pain to be willing to do that. His breath smelled bad. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And still, Job doesn't curse God. Job maintains his integrity throughout all of this. And so what we see then is this great turn of events. What we see are two things, and that is Job wouldn't give up his faith in God, and he wasn't going to give up his integrity. And if you remember, that's what his wife basically told him to do when she went to him and said, Job, why don't you just curse God and die? And as we discussed, I think it was, I'm sure she was frustrated, she was hurting. She's lost kids too, she's lost their very way of life. And to top that off, here's her husband, who's just a wreck of a man now. and had pity on him. And I think that's one of the motivations she had for saying what she said. But even then, Job won't do that. He's not about to give up his trust in God and to give up his integrity. So in chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, what we see here are these comforters, his friends, if you will, that come to him. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices and wept. And each of them tore his robe, and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. So not only was it very uncomfortable for Job physically, but it totally altered his appearance, so that these 3 friends that surely he had known for quite some time, when they come walking up, they don't even recognize him. That's quite a stunning change. I think one of the, as we go through this, I think what we'll see is one of the best things they did was they sat down and kept their mouths shut. You know, in times in my life with great pain, the loss of a loved one or such, it wasn't so much what people would come and say, but I'll never forget a dear brother walking by me and just squeezing my shoulder. Didn't say a word. And that spoke volumes. And it was such a comfort. And so I think these guys started off well, but it certainly doesn't go well. But in spite of that fact, these 3 men do have some good qualities to them. Each of them came from a very long way away to be with Job. And that shows that they really cared about him. And when they sat down with him, they didn't sit down in a hotel room or living room to sit with him. They sat right on the ash heap with him. That's a true friend meeting you where your needs are at that time. Their expression of grief, where they tore their robes and threw dust on their heads, in that part of the world, and even to this day, still that's how many will mourn. You'll hear the women wailing, and it's quite an unsettling thing to hear when we see that, especially on television. So we learn here one of the best ways that we can help people who are hurting is just to be with them. You know, just our presence alone lets them know that we indeed care. And so I think often we're struggling to find the right words. What are the right words that I can say? When in fact, it's better for them and it's easier on us if we just don't say anything. If we just sit with them and say, you know, I'm praying for you. And that's all that needs to be said. What we're going to see is, though, these friends, they want to try and explain this to Job. And they have faulty reasoning. And that's going to come out at the end. And regardless of the fact, even if their explanations were right, that wasn't going to ease his suffering. If I broke my foot, and just because you can show me an x-ray that my foot is indeed broken, does that relieve the pain in my foot? No. Explanations, it's not going to do it in and of itself. So instead of being friends, they actually turn and basically become like a prosecuting attorney. And God rebukes them so much so that in chapter 42, they have to go to Job and ask for forgiveness. And certainly he grants that to them. In chapter 3, what we see here is the voice of the sufferer, if you will. Afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said, a boy is conceived. May that day be darkness. Let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and black gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle on it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful shout enter it. Let those who curse it curse the day. Who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. Let the stars of its twilight be darkened. Let it wait for light, but have none. Neither let it see the breaking dawn, because it did not shut the opening of my mother's womb, or hide troubles from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, and why the breast that I should suck? For now I would have lain down and been quiet, I would have slept then, I would have been at rest, with kings and with counselors of the earth, who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who were filling their houses with silver, or like a miscarriage which is discarded, I would not be, as infants that never saw light. There the wicked cease from raging, and there the weary are at rest. The prisoners are at ease together. They do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who suffers, and life to the bitter of the soul, who long for death, but there is none, and dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice greatly, they exult when they find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? For my groaning comes at the sight of my food, and my cries pour out like water. For what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet, and I am not at rest, but turmoil comes. This man's in great, great, great pain. And so Job, when he first speaks, it's not to curse God because of where he's at, but it's to curse the day of his birth. But it was also to curse the night of his conception. And what he's not asking for here is basically to, he's not looking to commit suicide. Job's not going to do that. He knows he's not going to do that. But he's saying, if I'd never been born, I would never have to go through what I'm going through right now. In Jeremiah chapter 20, we see the same thing where the prophet asked, why was I ever born? This was a prophet that was greatly persecuted and felt those same ways. So this is the declaration of a man whose suffering was so intense that he just wished he had never been born. One of the things I think that's instructive about this is very easy is we're going through pain and we're going through a difficult circumstance. I think one of the things that's easy to lose sight of and easy to lose appreciation of are the blessings that we've been given. And so as Job is going through this, and this is not a condemnation on my part at all, but certainly he had forgotten the blessings that he had been given by God. God gave him a wife. God gave him 10 children. God blessed him financially, materially, positionally, and he had forgotten all of those things. And so Job's friends, they hear these words, and they take a wrong approach to helping him handle his trials that he's in at the moment. And they argued with his words instead of ministering to his feelings. And so he closes his curse with 4 why questions that nobody but God could answer. And it's easy to ask why, but it's difficult to get the right answer. And sometimes we don't get the right answer, do we? Sometimes we don't get an answer at all. And there's nothing wrong with asking why, as long as we don't get the idea that God owes us an explanation. God doesn't owe us anything. Even in Matthew 27, Jesus, on the cross, he asked God, why have you forsaken me? It was a question, why, and there's nothing wrong with asking why. It's important to remember that we live on promises and not explanations. God has promised what he has done for us, what he's doing for us, what he's going to do for us, and those are the things we have to live on. And so to spend too much time asking God why is kind of pointless, right? So we need to get away from those things. In verses 13 through 26 of chapter 3, what we see is a description of the world of the dead. And this is the place that the Jews called Sheol. And that's where Job wanted to be. The Old Testament doesn't give us a complete and final revelation of life after death. That had to wait until the coming of Jesus. But Job sees Sheol as a shadowy place where the small and the great rested together, away from the burdens and the sufferings of life on earth. And when you look at Scripture and what happens when someone dies, if they die in the Lord, do we go straight to heaven, or do we go to a place where we're waiting for everything to be consummated in the end, right? So that's where Job wants to be, in that place. He's not saying, I know I've done things wrong and I'm heading the other direction. The other direction is someone who dies who's not in the Lord and goes to what some people call Hades. It's not hell, it's not the final, it's almost like this holding cell, waiting for the final consummation. When we're all going to stand at the final judgment, and people are going to be judged. Certainly not Christians, because our judgment was paid for at Calvary. But the unbelievers will certainly be judged. And then from there, thrown into hell, into the lake of burning fire. And so Job, he's saying, I would rather be dead and resting and away from all of this than have to deal with all of this. Verse 23, what we see here is that Job acknowledges he's in the dark as far as his future is concerned. He just sees absolutely no light in his future with all these losses that he's had. And so to him, he might as well be in the darkness of Sheol and be at rest and at peace. And so Job, in verses 25 to 26, there's this little bit of a secret. Before all his trouble started, he had a feeling and a fear that something terrible was about to happen to him. And so the question is, was it an intuition from the Lord? Or was it a message somehow? We just don't know what that is. But we read there that he has an idea or a fear that something's about to come upon him. And so these three friends, when they begin to counsel, if you want to put it that way, they get hold of this lament that he has, that he'd rather not be born, instead of his statement of faith. And we saw that in chapter 1, where he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. That's a great statement of faith. And he's right in the middle of it when he makes that statement. So after he curses his birthday, we're going to see where these three friends feel it necessary to rebuke him and to defend God. God doesn't need to be defended. God is God, and he can defend himself and will. And so now a discussion begins, and pretty soon it's going to become a debate, and then it's going to become a disagreement, and then finally God has to step in and straighten everything out. So let's look at these three friends of Job's, and see who they were. In chapter 32, verse 6, we're told that all three were of old, and that they were older than Job. And we see that in chapter 15. And we assume that Eliphaz was probably the oldest because he was the one who spoke first. And the custom in that time, and even today, whoever is oldest in the room gets to say the first word. And the Lord seems to have accepted him as the elder member of the three. He was associated with Teman. He was a Temanite, and that was a place that was known for its wisdom. And Eliphaz bases his speeches on two things. In chapter 4 or 5, what we're going to see is his own observations of life. He says, I have seen. And a frightening personal experience that he had one night also in chapter 4. Eliphaz puts great faith in tradition, and the God he worshipped was an inflexible lawgiver. In chapter 4, he asks, whoever perished being innocent? And we could just about hear a bunch of martyrs in heaven now going, we've perished, we've been innocent, but yet we perished. And the same thing with the Lord, he could answer that same question the same way. And so Eliphaz has this rigid theology that leaves little room or no room for the grace of God. And we see people like that today, unfortunately, right? Where sometimes you begin to talk about grace to them, and that's offensive to a lot of people. We like to think as human beings that we can keep the rules, right? And so when you read the Ten Commandments and you really ponder what they mean, and you go to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 and 6, and Jesus says, you think that's the law? Let me show you what it's really all about. And if you're humble and intelligent to any degree, you have to stand up and say, I can't do this. There's no way I can fulfill these laws. And certainly under grace, Jesus did that for us, and it's already been accounted to us. So Eliphaz has this very rigid theology, more of a Pharisee, if you will, just a really rigid person. Bildad He must have been the second oldest since he speaks after Eliphaz. So it's like they're going in a chronological order of their ages. And so in a word, Bildad was a legalist. In chapter 8, he says, "Behold, God will not cast away a perfect man, neither will he help the evildoers." And so he could quote ancient proverbs, and like Eliphaz, he had a great respect for tradition. And for some reason, Bildad was sure that Job's children died because they were also sinners. And so he seems to have absolutely no feelings for his hurting friend. Zophar is the youngest of the three, and definitely the most dogmatic. He speaks like a schoolmaster addressing a group of ignorant freshmen. In chapter 11 and chapter 20, he starts off saying, "Know this." He knows everything. He's a legalist. He's merciless, and he tells Job that God was giving him far less than he deserved for his sins, in chapter 11. And his key text is, "Know you not this of old, that the triumphing of wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment." And interestingly, Zophar only speaks to Job twice. Either he decided he was unable to answer Job's arguments, or he just felt like it was a waste of time. And all three men, as we look at this, will say some good things, some true things, as well as some foolish things. But they're no help to Job because their viewpoint is so narrow and limited. Their theology wasn't vital and vibrant, but it was dead and rigid. And the God they tried to defend was small enough to be understood and explained. And that is not our God, right? Certainly, God gives us the beginnings of understanding of Him, but we'll spend the rest of eternity really learning who He is. So these men perfectly illustrate something that Dorothy Sayers had said. There's nothing you can't prove if your outlook is only sufficiently limited. And that's a lot of truth, and God is not limited, so we can't explain it. By maintaining his integrity and refusing to say he had sinned, Job was undermining their theology, basically, and he was robbing them of their peace and confidence, and this made them angry. And this, again, when you deal with legalists in our churches today, you see the same thing. When you begin to challenge them and you begin to make them think, and they begin to see grace. Grace is not necessarily a good thing to them. They fear grace because, once again, they think that they can get there on their own. So they become very angry. So God uses Job to destroy their shallow theology and challenge them to go deeper into the heart and the mind of God. And certainly by the end of the book, I think they come to that realization very quickly that, hey, what we always thought about God was absolutely wrong. It was way too limited. And so they prefer the superficial and the safe to the profound and the mysterious, which is God Himself. God is very mysterious. God is incredibly profound. There's no way that we can even begin to get our heads around that, especially when you look at creation. As Greg was talking about in Psalms, you look at the structure and the function of the human body. It is phenomenal how we are put together and how we function. And someone gets sick. I've been battling out allergies for several days now. And I thought, this is an amazing body that God's built in. All these defense mechanisms that are linked and intertwined. And when one's down, the other comes up. And it's all these compensation things. It is amazing to me that we aren't sicker more often and to a much greater extent than what we are. And to see the human body, to understand the human body, and to say that was all random chance and not God, I don't see how you can come to that conclusion. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, there's many of their disciples today. There are people out there who feel compelled to explain everything. They have a pat answer for everything, and these fixed formulas for solving every problem. And when you hear that is someone that's back at the ash heap with Job. They think they've got all the answers. Swiss psychologist and believer Paul Tournier, this is what he said. He said, "We are nearly always longing for an easy religion, easy to understand and easy to follow. A religion with no mystery, no insoluble problems, no snags, a religion that would allow us to escape from our miserable human condition, a religion in which contact with God spares us all strife, all uncertainty, all suffering, and all doubt. In short, a religion without the cross. Christ suffered, and so he told his children, his believers, you too are going to suffer. And he also told us in the New Testament that there are many troubles in this life. That's life. That's the way it is. And so as you think about this, you remember the two disciples on their way to Emmaus when the Lord appeared to them after his resurrection. I just wonder how Job's three friends would have explained the cross to those two disciples. It would have been quite a conversation. So what we see here first in chapter 4 through chapter 7, we see this discussion which begins. What Satan couldn't do with the Sabaeans and Chaldeans and all his winds from the wilderness to help him, he soon did that with the debating approaches and the controversial assaults of these three friends on Job. So the three friends were silent for 7 days. We see that in chapter 2. And then in chapter 13, we'll see that Job wishes that they'd have just stayed that way, stayed silent. Then Eliphaz, the Temanite, answered Job, but what did he answer? He didn't answer his pain in his heart. He answered the words from Job's lips. The wise counselor and comforter must listen with the heart and respond to feelings as well as to words. You don't heal a broken heart with logic, you heal a broken heart with love. Yeah, we have to speak the truth, but we have to speak that truth in love. And Paul tells us that in Ephesians chapter 4. It's always truth, but it's truth in love. And so what we see in the beginning of chapter 4 is Eliphaz as he starts his rebuke. It's in the first 4 verses. And Eliphaz the Temanite answered, if one ventures a word with you, will you become impatient? But who can refrain from speaking? Behold, you have admonished many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have helped a tolerant to stand, and you have strengthened feeble knees. He's basically saying, don't get upset with me, Job, with what I'm about to say. Your words in the past have been a big help to a lot of people, so now I'm going to give you my words, and I'm going to help you out through this thing. So the right words spoken at the right time and with the right motive can make a tremendous difference in the lives of someone. And I'm sure we have all examples of people who have spoken in our lives at the right time with right words at the absolute right moment, and it made all the difference in the world. It can totally turn things around. On the flip side of that is the wrong word at the wrong time can totally upend someone's world. So we need to be careful with our words. And so we see his accusation beginning in verse 5. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and integrity of your ways your hope? Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where might the upright destroyed? According to what I've seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvested. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they come to an end. The roaring of the lion and the voice of the fierce lion and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and the whelps of the lioness are scattered. Basically, he's telling Job, you can give it, but you can't take it. Can you imagine telling someone that who's just suffering? Job could tell other people how to handle their trials, but when those same trials came to his life, he just couldn't handle it. And he didn't practice what he preached. In verse 6, Eliphaz asked him, is not your reverence your confidence and the integrity of your ways your hope? Eliphaz is saying, Job, if you really are living a godly life, then you have nothing to fear. Because God always blesses the righteous and judges the wicked. And this is the basic premise of all three of his friends. Do what is right and things will go well for you. Do what is wrong and God will send judgment. That judgment may sometimes be gradual, like the growing of a crop for harvest in verse 8, or it could be sudden, like the coming of a storm or the attack of a lion. But you can be sure that judgment will come, for God is a righteous judge. Now, most people will agree that ultimately God does bless the righteous, right? He blesses his own people and judges the wicked, but that's not the question that's being discussed here. It's not the ultimate outcome, but it's the immediate outcome, which Job's three friends are all concerned about. And not only are they concerned about it, but we saw in Psalms, David, Asaph, and then Jeremiah, the prophet, even asked the same thing. So what we see now are his arguments. Eliphaz is going to present two arguments to prove his point. In verse 12, what we see is he's going to base it on his experience. Now, a word was brought to me stealthily, and my ear received a whisper of it. Amid disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, dread came upon me and trembling, and made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed by my face, the hair of my flesh bristled up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes, there was silence, and then I heard a voice. Can mankind be just before God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? He puts no trust even in his servants, and against his angels he charges error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed before the moth. Between morning and evening they are broken in pieces, unobserved they perish forever. Is not their tent cord plucked up within them? They die, yet without wisdom. So he's basing this argument on something that he's experienced, something that happened one night when he sees this vision and hears a voice. And so two questions have to be asked about that particular vision and what he said. What was the content of the message, and was the message a direct revelation from God? The message of this is basically the same. Man's life is brief and frail, and he can never be righteous enough in himself to please God. Eliphaz wasn't telling the whole story about God and man, though. You know, we all live in this house of clay that eventually is going to go to dust. And certainly we know that life can end suddenly, and that life can be prolonged and go on for quite some time. But eventually everyone's going to die. But what he leaves out is, since we are made in the image of God, and the God who made us is a God of grace and mercy, as well as a God of justice. So he's very much a legalist. The second argument he has is based on his own personal observations of life. And this is where I think you have to be really careful, because we all interpret events and activities in very different ways, because we're all different people, right? We have we're shaped by our own biases, we're shaped by our own experiences. And so for us to project our expectations onto someone who's suffering is really not fair at all. So in verses 1 through 7 of chapter 5, call now, is there anyone who will answer you? And to which of the holy ones will you turn? For vexation slays the foolish man, and anger kills the simple. I've seen the foolish taking root, and I've cursed his abode immediately. His sons are far from safety, they are even oppressed in the gate. Neither is there a deliverer, his harvest the hungry devour, and take it to places of thorns, and the schemer is eager for their wealth. For affliction does not come from the dust, neither does trouble sprout from the ground. For man is born for trouble, as sparks fly upward. So what he's saying, he's seen sinners be prosperous and take root, only eventually to be destroyed and to lose everything. And so basically, that's what he's saying about Job. Job, you're really a sinner, because I've seen sinners that become prosperous, and then all of a sudden it's taken away all at one time. That's what's happened to you, Job. You're a sinner. And you know this had to really hurt Job deeply. Eliphaz is telling him that it was his sin, Job's sin, that killed his children. And that's a horrible thing to say. In Psalm 73, Asaph, he looks at this from a totally different view. He says that God allows the wicked to prosper in this life because it's the only heaven that they will ever know. You ever thought about that? I try and tell myself that on days that aren't going so well, days that are difficult, and I think, you know what? My worst day here is far better than the best day in hell. I'll never have to face that. This is temporary. Better things are ahead. God's going to adjust things and see that his people are rewarded and the wicked are punished. You know, the problem with arguing from observation is that our observations are severely limited. And we can't see the human heart like God does. It's easy for us to make assumptions about things that are happening or about people, but we don't know what their heart is. Only God does. And some sinners suffer judgment almost immediately, while some will spend their life in prosperity and die in peace. And certainly, looking at figures in history, Stalin, just a horrible man, wicked man, and died in old age. But he was very bitter when he died. And I can't imagine that he died in peace. If Job is in trouble, concludes Eliphaz, he caused it himself because he sinned against God. And therefore, Job, you have to repent of your sins and ask for God's forgiveness. What we see in verses 8 through 17 is this appeal from Eliphaz that Job seek God and commit himself to him. It's a little on the crazy side, I think. But as for me, he's about to tell him what he ought to do. But as for me, I would seek God, and I would place my cause before God, who does great and unsearchable things, wonders without number. He gives rain on the earth and sends water on the fields, so that he sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. He frustrates the plotting of the shrewd so that their hands cannot attain success. He captures the wise by their own shrewdness, and the advice of the cunning is quickly thwarted. By day they meet with darkness and grope at night at noon as in the night. But he saves from the sword of their mouth and the poor from the hand of the mighty. So the helpless has hope, and unrighteousness must shut its mouth. Behold, how happy is the man who God reproves. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. For he inflicts pain and gives relief. He wounds, and his hands also heal. So basically what he's telling Job is, Job, this God who does wonders and really cares for his creation in this world, if you'll just humble yourself, confess your sin, God will make everything right. The other thing he tells him in 17 and 18 is, Job, you really need to see your trials as discipline from God to make you a better man. And this same theme is going to be taken up later by another one of the friends. He's basically telling him, Job, you must have been in bad shape for God to have taken away your wealth, your family, and your health in order to straighten him out. And so in verses 17 through 27, Eliphaz closes his speech with words of assurance. And he says, the same God who wounds is also going to heal. Behold, how happy is the man that God reproves. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he inflicts pain and gives relief. He wounds, and his hands also heal. From 6 troubles he will deliver you. Even in 7 evil will not touch you. In famine he will redeem you from death, and in war the power of the sword. You will be hidden from the scourge of the tongue, neither will you be afraid of violence when it comes. You will laugh at violence and famine, neither will you be afraid of wild beasts. For you will be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field will be at peace with you. And you will know that your tent is secure, for you will visit your abode and fear no loss. You will also know that your descendants will be many, and your offspring is the grass of the earth. You will come to the grave in full vigor like the stacking of grain in its season. Behold this, we have investigated it, thus it is. Hear it and know it for yourself. This guy's a know-it-all. He thinks he's got all the answers. But this is where Eliphaz says, we've examined this, we know this to be true, this is what you need to do, so you just need to apply this to yourself. But this is the same philosophy that Satan had when he appeared before God. And you remember Satan's question, does Job fear God for nothing? Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. And Eliphaz was asking Job to make a bargain with God, basically. Confess your sins and he'll bless you. And he's going to restore everything to you that you've lost. And if Job had done that, it would have disgraced God and vindicated Satan. And Job is not about to do that. He is definitely a man of integrity, and we'll see that. All right, we're going to stop right there. And next week, beginning in chapter 6, we're going to see Job's response to this particular argument.